The man who shuffled into my courtroom that Thursday morning moved like every step caused pain. Albert Chen, 80 years old according to the file, but he looked even older. His back was curved, his gait unsteady, and he used a walking stick that was really just a thick branch he'd probably found somewhere. His clothes were clean but worn thin, patched in places with different fabrics that didn't quite match. His white hair was neatly combed back, and despite everything, there was a dignity in how he held himself, a pride that hadn't been eroded by whatever circumstances had brought him here. The citation was simple: trespassing. He'd been found sleeping in the covered entrance of a closed bank building on Westminster Street. The security guard had called the police at 2:30 in the morning. This was his third such citation in 6 months. The file showed 2 prior failures to appear, which had added contempt charges and additional fees. His total fines now stood at $1,450. Looking at him, at this 80-year-old man who could barely walk, who was clearly homeless, I felt the familiar weight of these cases. We cite people for being poor, for being old, for having nowhere else to go. Then we pile on fees they can't pay. Then we issue warrants. And the cycle continues until someone ends up in jail for the crime of homelessness. But there was something about Albert Chen that caught my attention. Maybe it was the way he stood at the defendant's table, his back as straight as his age and condition allowed. Maybe it was the careful way he'd folded his few possessions into a canvas bag that looked military issue. Or maybe it was his eyes, sharp, clear, intelligent eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. "Mr. Chen," I began gently, "you're here on a trespassing charge. Third citation in 6 months. You've missed 2 court dates, which has added to your fines. The total is now $1,450. Before we proceed, I need to understand your situation. Are you currently homeless?" He looked at me directly, his voice surprisingly strong despite his frail appearance. "Yes, Your Honor. I've been homeless for about 8 months now." "And where do you usually sleep?" "Wherever I can find shelter, Your Honor. The bank entrance where I was cited, it has an overhang that keeps the rain off. I wasn't blocking the doors. The bank has been closed for 2 years. I was just trying to stay dry." His English was accented but precise, every word carefully chosen. "Mr. Chen, I see from your file that you're 80 years old. Have you tried to get into a shelter?" "Yes, Your Honor. The shelters are always full. There's a waiting list. I'm on it, but they tell me it could be 6 months or more. At my age, 6 months feels like a long time." He said it without self-pity, just stating facts. I looked at the prosecutor, Jennifer Chen. Interesting coincidence, the same last name. "Miss Chen, what's the city's position?" She stood, and I could see the discomfort on her face. "Your Honor, the violations are documented. However, given Mr. Chen's age and circumstances, if the court wishes to consider alternatives, the city would be amenable." Before I could respond, something made me pause. That canvas bag he was carrying, the way he stood, the precision of his speech despite his accent. "Mr. Chen," I said, "that bag you're carrying, is that military issue?" He glanced down at the faded green canvas bag, and something shifted in his expression. "Yes, Your Honor, it's very old, but it's held up well. Better than most things." "Did you serve in the military, Mr. Chen?" The courtroom went quiet. He stood a little straighter, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight it hadn't before. "Yes, Your Honor, United States Army. I served from 1966 to 1969. If you believe our elderly veterans deserve better than sleeping in bank doorways, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what this 80-year-old man is about to reveal will leave you speechless and prove that sometimes the people we overlook have the most extraordinary stories. Mr. Chen, 1966 to 1969. That means you served in Vietnam." "Yes, Your Honor. 2 tours. I was infantry, 1st Air Cavalry Division." I set down my pen. "In 38 years on this bench, I've seen many veterans. Young ones, old ones, those who served in peacetime and those who saw combat. But something about Albert Chen made me want to understand more. Tell me about your service, Mr. Chen." He hesitated, like he wasn't used to people asking. Like he'd become so invisible that his past had been forgotten along with his present circumstances. "Your Honor, I immigrated to the United States in 1964. I was 20 years old, came from Taiwan with my parents. We had nothing. My father worked in a restaurant kitchen. My mother cleaned houses. I wanted to give back to this country that had given us opportunity. So in 1966, I enlisted. I went through basic training at Fort Benning, then infantry training. Then they sent me to Vietnam. I arrived in country in December 1966. I was assigned to the 1st Air Cavalry Division, Bravo Company. We operated in the Central Highlands mostly, search and destroy missions, securing villages, fighting an enemy we often couldn't see. His voice was steady, but I could see his hands gripping the walking stick tighter. My first tour was 13 months. I saw heavy combat. I lost friends, good men who never came home. When my tour ended in January 1968, I was supposed to go home. But the Tet Offensive happened. They needed experienced soldiers. I volunteered to extend for another 6 months. The courtroom was absolutely silent. People in the gallery were leaning forward, listening. During that extension, my unit was involved in heavy fighting near Hue during the Tet Offensive. We were holding a position, taking fire from 3 sides. A grenade landed near our position. I saw it, grabbed it, threw it back before it detonated, saved 3 men who were in the blast radius. He paused. 2 weeks later, we were in another firefight. One of my squad members was hit, went down in an exposed position. I went out and dragged him back under fire. Took a round in my leg doing it, but I got him back. He survived. I was listening intently now, and so was everyone else. This frail, homeless 80-year-old man had been a combat hero. I finished my extension and came home in July 1968. They awarded me the Bronze Star for Valor for the grenade incident, and the Purple Heart for the wound I took bringing back my squad member. I was 24 years old when I came home. I'd seen things no one should see. "What did you do after you came home?" I asked quietly. "I used the GI Bill to go to college. Boston University. I studied engineering. Graduated in 1972. I got a job with an aerospace company in California. I worked there for 33 years. I was a senior engineer when I retired in 2005. I worked on satellite systems, guidance technology, important projects." He said it matter-of-factly, without boasting, just stating facts. "I married in 1975. My wife, Linda, she was a nurse. We had a good life. Not wealthy, but comfortable. We had a house in Pasadena. We raised 2 children, a son and a daughter. Both went to college. Both have good careers now. We did what we came to America to do. We built a life." "What happened?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "Linda died in 2018, Alzheimer's. I took care of her at home for as long as I could, but eventually she needed specialized care, memory care facility. Our insurance covered some, but not all. It cost $8,000 a month. I paid it from our retirement savings for 3 years, until she passed." His voice remained steady, but I could hear the emotion underneath. "When she died, our savings were mostly gone. I still had the house, but I was lonely there. Every room reminded me of her. My son lives in Seattle, my daughter in Chicago. They have their own families, their own lives. I didn't want to burden them, so I decided to move, to start over somewhere smaller, less expensive. I sold the house in 2022. After paying off the remaining mortgage and settling Linda's final medical bills, I had about $60,000 left. I thought that would be enough. I moved here to Providence because I'd visited once and found it peaceful. I rented a small apartment, $1,200 a month. I was living on Social Security, $1,680 a month. It was tight but manageable. Then what? Then I got sick, pneumonia, last December. I was in the hospital for a week, then a rehabilitation facility for 2 weeks. I have Medicare, but the co-pays and deductibles were substantial, $11,000 total. That took most of what I had left from the house sale. When I got out, I'd missed 2 months of rent because I was in the hospital and rehab. My landlord evicted me. By the time I was well enough to look for a new place, I had an eviction on my record. No one would rent to me. He shifted his weight, his leg probably hurting from standing so long. I tried to find somewhere, anywhere, but every application was denied. Eviction history, they said. At my age, with my limited income, I was considered a risk, so I ended up on the streets. That was 8 months ago. I sleep where I can. I eat at the community meal programs. I try to stay clean, stay dignified, but it's hard, Your Honor. At 80 years old, it's very hard. The courtroom was absolutely silent. You could hear people breathing, but no one moved. This 80-year-old homeless man sleeping in a bank doorway was a Bronze Star recipient. a Purple Heart veteran, an aerospace engineer who'd worked on satellites, a loving husband who'd bankrupted himself caring for his wife with Alzheimer's. I looked down at the file, at the $1,450 in fines for trespassing, for having nowhere else to sleep, at the system that had taken a man who'd given so much to this country and reduced him to citations and contempt charges. "Mr. Chen," I said, and my voice was rougher than I intended, "you threw yourself on a grenade to save your squad. You ran into enemy fire to rescue a wounded soldier. You served this country with valor. You worked for 33 years contributing to aerospace technology. You cared for your wife with Alzheimer's until your savings were gone, and now you're standing in my courtroom being prosecuted for sleeping in a doorway because you have nowhere else to go." He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, that's accurate." I stood up. When I stand during a hearing, people know something significant is happening. But this time, I came all the way down from the bench and walked over to where Albert Chen stood. "Mr. Chen, before we discuss these citations, I need to do something." I extended my hand. He looked at it, confused for a moment, then shifted his walking stick and shook my hand. His grip was still firm despite his age. "Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for everything you've given to this country. And I apologize, on behalf of this system, that we failed you so completely." His eyes filled with tears. "Your Honor, you don't need to apologize. I'm just one old man." "No, Mr. Chen, you're not just one old man. You're a decorated combat veteran. You're an engineer who contributed to technologies that probably protect this country still. You're a devoted husband who sacrificed everything for the woman you loved. You're exactly the kind of person this system should be protecting, not prosecuting." I turned to the gallery. "How many veterans do we have in the courtroom today?" 6 people stood up, different ages, different service eras, but united by their military service. "Approach, please." They came forward, and I quickly explained Albert's situation. His service, his Bronze Star, his current homelessness, the impossible debt hanging over his head. Before I could even ask, a man in his 70s stepped forward. "Judge Caprio, my name is Thomas Delgado, Marine Corps, Vietnam, same era as Mr. Chen. This man is a brother. We don't let our brothers sleep on streets. I'll pay his entire fine right now, all $1,450. He pulled out a checkbook. I raised my hand. "Mr. Delgado, that's generous. But no, Judge. No buts. This man threw himself on a grenade. He ran into fire to save someone. You know what that takes? That takes courage I didn't have. I'll pay the fine, and I'm going to do more. I'm going to make some calls. We have a veterans housing program. We'll get him a place today." Another veteran stepped forward, a woman in her 50s. "Judge, I'm Rebecca Walsh, Army. I run a nonprofit that helps elderly veterans. Mr. Chen qualifies for VA benefits he's probably not receiving. We can help him apply. We can also help with his medical expenses, his daily needs, everything. One by one, the veterans pledge support. Housing, food, medical care, companionship, a whole network of assistance. Within 10 minutes, they'd assembled a comprehensive support system for Albert Chen. I looked at the prosecutor. "Miss Chen, in light of what we've just heard, what's the city's position on these citations?" Jennifer Chen stood, and I could see tears in her eyes. "Your Honor, the city moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Chen, all fines waived, all contempt charges dropped. This man should never have been cited in the first place. He should have been offered help, not punishment." I nodded. "Motion granted. All charges dismissed. All fines eliminated. Mr. Chen, you owe this court nothing. Instead, this court owes you." I turned back to the veterans. "Mr. Delgado, you said you can get him housing today?" "Yes, Judge. We have emergency placements for homeless veterans. I'll make the call right now." "Mr. Chen will have a bed tonight, a real bed, in a safe place, with support services. Do it." I looked at Albert Chen, who was now crying openly, overwhelmed by what was happening. "Mr. Chen, these people are going to help you. They're going to get you housed, get you connected to VA benefits, get you the support you need and deserve. You're not going to spend another night on the street. Do you understand?" He could barely speak. "Your Honor, I don't. I can't believe. Why are you doing this?" "Because you're a hero, Mr. Chen. Because you served with valor when this country needed you. Because you built a life and contributed to society for decades. Because you cared for your wife until you had nothing left. Because you're 80 years old and you deserve dignity and safety and respect. That's why." I paused. "But I'm going to ask you for something in return." He wiped his eyes. Anything, Your Honor, anything. I want you to share your story. I want you to speak to young people about service, about sacrifice, about what it means to give to something larger than yourself. I want you to visit schools, talk to veteran groups, let people know that behind every homeless person might be someone extraordinary. Will you do that? Yes, Your Honor, I will. I promise. The courtroom erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, some crying. Albert Chen stood there, this frail 80-year-old man who'd been invisible on the streets, now surrounded by people who saw him, valued him, honored him. Thomas Delgado stepped forward and did something that made everyone in that courtroom understand what brotherhood really means. He saluted Albert Chen, then the other veterans did the same. 6 men and women, different ages, different branches, all saluting an 80-year-old homeless veteran in a Providence courtroom. Albert, despite his age and his walking stick, straightened as much as he could and returned the salute. His hand was steady, his bearing military despite everything. And in that moment, he wasn't homeless. He was Specialist Albert Chen, Bronze Star recipient, hero of the Vietnam War, being honored by those who understood what he'd given. I've seen a lot in 38 years, but I've never seen anything that moved me quite like that moment. Share this video if you believe we should honor our elderly veterans, not cite them. Comment below if you've ever overlooked someone who turned out to have an extraordinary story, because what happened next proved that one moment of asking about someone's past can change everything. 3 days later, Miss Reyes called me with an update. Albert Chen had been placed in permanent supportive housing for elderly veterans. 1-bedroom apartment, fully furnished, rent subsidized through VA programs. He'd met with the benefits coordinator and applied for aid and attendance benefits, which would increase his monthly income by $1,600. He'd been connected with VA healthcare and had appointments scheduled for a full medical evaluation. 2 weeks after the hearing, Thomas Delgado called me. "Judge, I wanted you to know, Albert's doing great. We got him set up completely, furniture, clothes, food, everything. But here's the thing, he insisted on going to the bank, the one where he was cited for trespassing." "Why?" I asked. "He wanted to apologize to the security guard who'd called the police on him. He told the guard he understood he was just doing his job, that there were no hard feelings." The guard ended up crying, said he'd felt terrible about it but didn't know what else to do. 1 month after the hearing, I received a call from Hope High School. Albert Chen had given his first talk to students about service and sacrifice. The principal told me that 400 students sat in complete silence for 40 minutes listening to this 80-year-old veteran describe what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to lose friends in combat, to come home and build a life despite trauma. "Judge Caprio," the principal said, "I've been in education for 30 years. I've never seen students that engaged." Afterwards, 17 students asked how they could volunteer with veteran organizations. 5 said they wanted to consider military service. One boy, whose grandfather is a Vietnam veteran, said he's going to actually talk to his grandfather about his service now instead of being afraid to ask. Mr. Chen did more for our students in 40 minutes than a year of textbooks could accomplish. 6 weeks after the hearing, I received a letter. "Dear Judge Caprio, I'm writing this from my apartment. My apartment. I still can't quite believe I have one. After 8 months sleeping in doorways and under bridges, I have a home again. It's small, but it's clean and safe and warm. I have a bed, a kitchen, a bathroom. I have dignity. But more than the physical comfort, you gave me something I'd lost. You gave me visibility. For 8 months, I was invisible. People looked past me, through me, around me. I was just another homeless person to be avoided or pitied or cited. You looked at me and asked about my service. That one question changed everything, because it acknowledged that I was something before I was homeless. It recognized that homelessness is a temporary condition, not an identity. When you asked about my military service, when you learned about my career, my family, my life, you saw me as a complete human being, not just a problem to be processed through the system. The veterans who helped me, they're incredible. Thomas checks on me 3 times a week. Rebecca's organization helped me navigate the VA bureaucracy, and I'm now receiving benefits I didn't even know I qualified for. I'm speaking at schools, sharing my story. And Judge, something amazing is happening. Students ask me questions about Vietnam, about what it was like, and I'm answering. For 50 years, I didn't talk about the war. It was too painful, too difficult. I came home to a country that didn't want to hear about it, so I buried it. But now, at 80 years old, I'm finally talking, and it's healing. The nightmares I've had for decades are lessening. The guilt I've carried about surviving when friends didn't is starting to ease. By sharing my story, I'm finding peace I never thought possible. You did that, Your Honor. By asking one question, by seeing me as a person instead of a case file, you changed my life. I was dying on those streets. Maybe not physically right away, but spiritually. I'd lost hope. I'd started to think maybe it was time to just give up. You gave me hope back. You reminded me that I still matter, that my life still has purpose, that my story still has value. I'll never forget standing in your courtroom, expecting to be fined or jailed, and instead being honored, being saluted by fellow veterans, being treated with dignity and respect. At 80 years old, sleeping in doorways, I thought my story was over. You showed me it's not over. Maybe the most important chapter is just beginning. Thank you, Judge Caprio. Thank you for seeing me. Respectfully, Albert Chen, Specialist Red A, U.S. Army, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. I kept that letter. I keep it in my desk where I can read it on difficult days when I'm wondering if any of this matters. Because Albert Chen's letter reminds me that it does matter. That taking the time to ask about someone's past, to see them as a complete human being instead of just their current circumstances, can literally save a life. 8 months after the hearing, Albert Chen was invited to be the Grand Marshal of Providence's Veterans Day Parade. He rode in a convertible, waving to crowds, his Bronze Star and Purple Heart pinned to his jacket. The local news did a feature story, From Homelessness to Honor, the 80-year-old veteran who refused to give up. The story went viral. Within a week, the state legislature passed new funding for elderly veteran housing. They called it Albert's Law. Today, Albert Chen lives independently in his apartment. He speaks at schools twice a month. He volunteers at the VA hospital, visiting elderly veterans who are isolated and alone. He's become friends with Thomas Delgado and the other veterans who helped him. They meet for coffee every Wednesday morning. And he's reconnected with his children. His son flew out from Seattle, his daughter from Chicago. They spent a weekend together, the first time they'd been in the same place in years. They apologized for not staying closer, for not knowing how bad things had gotten. He forgave them, because that's what Albert does. He moves forward, he helps others, he finds purpose in service. All because one Thursday morning in a Providence courtroom, instead of just processing another trespassing citation, I asked an 80-year-old homeless man about his past. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. Share it with anyone who works with homeless populations, with elderly individuals, with veterans. And remember, every homeless person you see was something before they were homeless. They were soldiers and engineers and teachers and parents. They had careers and families and dreams. They're not defined by sleeping in doorways. They're temporarily without housing, but they're permanently valuable, permanently deserving of dignity. Albert Chen taught me that. That one question, did you serve in the military, opened a door that revealed an entire life of service, sacrifice, courage, and contribution. How many other extraordinary stories are hidden behind the faces we walk past every day? How many heroes are sleeping in doorways, invisible to a society that's forgotten them? In my courtroom, I try to remember that every person has a story. Every case file represents a human being with a past, with dignity, with worth. And sometimes, all it takes is one question to change everything. What did you do before this? Where did you serve? Tell me about your life. Simple questions that acknowledge someone's humanity and might just save their life. That's not soft justice. That's the only kind of justice worth delivering. Because the law without compassion is just cruelty with a gavel, and I've spent 38 years trying to do better than that. Court adjourned.